The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the Cardinal Club like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze as the champagne flute exploded against Italian marble, silencing 100 conversations at once. Marcus Thompson, barely 22, stared at the growing puddle of Dom Perignon at his feet, knowing his dreams of medical school were dissolving just as quickly. Around him, designer dresses rustled as socialites shifted in their seats, phones rising like predators, sensing weakness. In the corner VIP section, beneath soft amber lighting, several guests smirked, already savoring the entertainment to come. Only one figure remained motionless, a distinguished gentleman in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his eyes narrowing as he observed the scene unfold. The Cardinal Club wasn't just any venue. It was where Manhattan's elite came to remind themselves of their importance. $2,000 membership fees were just the beginning. The real price was paid in connections and influence. Marcus had worked here for 8 months, carefully saving every tip, watching trust fund babies blow his entire tuition in a single night. He'd learned to become invisible, to move like a ghost between tables. But now, as James Morrison, the club's manager, approached with thunder in his eyes, Marcus knew invisibility was no longer an option. The $500 bottle he'd just destroyed represented a week's worth of classes. "Do you have any idea," Morrison's voice cut through the silence like a blade, "what kind of people you've just embarrassed us in front of?" His words carried to every corner of the room, deliberately pitched for maximum humiliation. As phones continued recording, Marcus felt his future crumbling. He didn't notice the gentleman in the charcoal suit slowly setting down his whiskey, didn't see Denzel Washington's eyes fixed on Morrison with growing intensity. In the next few minutes, everyone in the Cardinal Club would learn what true class really meant. Morrison's shoes clicked against marble with military precision as he advanced, each step a death knell to Marcus's dreams. 8 months of perfect service, of swallowed pride and careful savings, all shattered like that champagne flute. Around them, the Cardinal Club's evening service continued its choreographed dance, but every server had slowed imperceptibly, their movements measured and tense. They'd all seen this before. The crystal chandelier light caught Morrison's silver cufflinks as he reached for Marcus's bow tie. A $1,000 gesture of contempt. "Remove this," he hissed, each word precise and cold. "You no longer have the privilege of wearing our uniform." In the surrounding tables, several guests leaned forward, daughters of old money and sons of Wall Street, their eyes glittering with the same cruel anticipation Marcus had seen at every high society disaster he'd witnessed here. Behind his back, Marcus's hands trembled. His sister's insulin wasn't going to pay for itself. Their mother's second job barely covered rent. Every tip he'd earned here had been a lifeline, carefully budgeted between textbooks and medicine. Morrison wasn't finished. His voice rose deliberately, a performer certain of his audience. "Perhaps, young man, you should consider a career more suited to your capabilities. Fast food, perhaps?" A ripple of laughter spread through the nearest tables, the kind that came with $1,000 bottles and generations of inherited cruelty. Someone whispered, "World Star," as they steadied their phone camera. The shame burned hotter than any fever Marcus had nursed his sister through. He thought of her face this morning, pale but determined as she checked her blood sugar, of his mother's hands cracked from endless hospital cleaning shifts, of the medical school acceptance letter hidden in his locker downstairs, the one that might as well have been printed on gold leaf for all he could afford it. "Sir, I apologize, I can pay for—" Marcus started, but Morrison cut him off with a sharp laugh that could have sliced sushi. "Pay? With what? Your monthly salary wouldn't cover the bottle you just destroyed." He turned to the watching crowd, playing to his audience. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is why we usually have stricter hiring standards. Some people simply don't understand the meaning of class." In the VIP corner, Denzel Washington's glass settled onto its coaster with deliberate precision. His decades in Hollywood had taught him to read a scene, to feel its rhythm and flow. This one was all too familiar. Power drunk on itself. Dignity sacrificed for entertainment. He'd played both sides of this story, but reality cut deeper than any script. The young server's composure was cracking. Not in the dramatic way Morrison clearly hoped for, no outburst, no tears, but in the subtle tremor of his shoulders, the kind of quiet devastation Denzel had studied for roles but hated seeing in real life. The boy was swallowing his pride like bitter medicine, probably calculating exactly how many shifts, how many hours, how many humiliations it would take to replace that bottle. The other patrons were enjoying their dinner theater, phones still recording. Morrison had positioned himself perfectly, like a conductor before his orchestra of cruelty. His next words carried the practiced projection of someone who had staged such performances before. "I want you to apologize to our guests. Then clear out your locker. We'll mail you your final check, minus damages, of course." Marcus stood frozen, Morrison's words echoing in his ears, "Apologize to the guests." As if the shame of one broken glass wasn't enough. Now he had to perform his own public execution. His eyes swept across the watching faces, each one a mirror reflecting his failure. The woman in Valentino who'd once lectured him for 10 minutes about the temperature of her sparkling water. The hedge fund manager who snapped his fingers for service like calling a dog. The debutante who'd left him a penny as a tip, giggling about teaching financial responsibility. Morrison cleared his throat expectantly, savoring each second. This was his favorite part. He'd done this before, 6 times in the past year alone. Each firing carefully staged, each humiliation orchestrated for maximum impact. It kept the other servers in line, reminded the guests of their elevated status, and, most importantly, entertained the right people. In the Cardinal Club, cruelty was just another luxury amenity. "We're waiting," Morrison prompted, his voice dripping with false patience. "Our guests' time is valuable. Unlike yours?" More snickers rippled through the crowd. Someone started a slow clap, the sound spreading like poison through honey. Denzel Washington's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his whiskey glass. In his 40-plus years of acting, he'd developed an eye for authentic moments, the kind no script could capture. The subtle way Marcus's shoulders stayed squared, despite the weight crushing them. The tension in his jaw that spoke of responsibilities waiting at home. The quiet dignity that no amount of public shame seemed able to break. This wasn't just another service industry drama. This was about something deeper, something that cut to the heart of what people called class. Marcus opened his mouth to begin his forced apology, but the words stuck in his throat. Behind him, a chair scraped softly against marble. The slow clapping faltered, then died. Even Morrison's carefully crafted smirk flickered as Denzel Washington rose from his corner table, commanding attention without saying a word. The actor moved with the deliberate grace of someone who understood the power of presence. Each step measured, unhurried. The watching phones swiveled away from Marcus, drawn to the bigger story. Here was the real entertainment, a genuine A-list celebrity about to weigh in. Morrison's expression shifted rapidly between confusion and calculation, trying to determine if this unexpected development would enhance or ruin his performance. "You know," Denzel's voice carried the same rich authority that had earned him 2 Academy Awards, "I worked as a server once, back before anyone knew my name." He paused beside Marcus, who stood so still he might have been carved from the same marble as the floor. Midnight shifts at a post office, barbershop porter, restaurant jobs, the kind of work that builds character, or reveals it. His eyes swept the room, settling on each phone camera in turn. The same devices that had been weaponized for humiliation now captured something else entirely. Morrison shifted his weight, suddenly unsure of his footing in this unexpected scene. The power dynamics in the room were changing like tidewaters, and he wasn't the one controlling the flow anymore. "Tell me, Mr. Morrison," Denzel continued, his tone deceptively conversational, "what was your first job? The one that taught you about class?" Morrison's complexion shifted from pristine confidence to mottled uncertainty. The question hung in the air like smoke, refusing to dissipate. Around them, the dinner theater audience had found a new target for their attention, phones still recording, but now aimed at the manager's increasingly uncomfortable face. That's hardly relevant to," Morrison began, but Denzel cut him off with the same gentle authority he'd used to command movie scenes for decades. "Oh, but it is relevant. Very relevant." He gestured to Marcus, who stood straight despite the tremor in his hands. "This young man is working his way through medical school, taking care of his family, building something real." His voice took on an edge that had won him countless dramatic scenes. "But you wouldn't know about that, would you? About working your way up? About earning respect instead of demanding it?" The whispers started at the back of the room, spreading like wildfire through the tables. Phones were already uploading clips to social media. Tomorrow, this would be everywhere. Not the humiliation of a young server, but something far more revealing. Morrison's face had gone from red to white, his carefully cultivated authority evaporating under the heat of real star power. He tried to rally, to reclaim his audience. "Mr. Washington, while we appreciate your patronage, this is an internal matter." "Internal?" Denzel's laugh was low, measured, perfectly timed. "No, this stopped being internal the moment you decided to make it a public show. You wanted an audience?" He spread his arms, encompassing the entire room. "Well, now you've got one. So let's talk about what class really means." Denzel moved through the space like he owned it, not with Morrison's practiced pomposity, but with the earned confidence of someone who'd played kings and still remembered washing dishes. The room held its breath, watching him circle the manager with the same intensity he brought to his most powerful scenes. "Let me tell you a story about class," he began, his voice pitched to reach every corner of the suddenly silent club. "Not the kind you learn from price tags or membership fees. Real class." He paused, letting the weight of his presence fill the room. "Years ago, I was filming in Chicago. Brutal winter night, everyone hurrying home. I saw this homeless man outside the hotel, shivering so hard he could barely stand. The doorman, making maybe $15 an hour, took off his own coat and gave it to him. Didn't know anyone was watching. Didn't do it for show." His eyes locked onto Morrison's, holding him in place like a butterfly pinned to velvet. That doorman? He had class. The kind you can't buy with any amount of overpriced champagne. The phones were still recording, but their owners had forgotten they were holding them. Even the most jaded socialites leaned forward, caught in the gravity of authentic star power meeting genuine truth. Marcus stood absolutely still, watching his public execution transform into something else entirely. "So when I see someone like you," Denzel continued, each word precise as a surgeon's cut, "trying to teach lessons about class by humiliating a young man working for his future, well, that tells me everything I need to know about what you don't understand." Morrison had faced down board members, celebrity tantrums, and entitled billionaires, but nothing had prepared him for this. Every carefully constructed layer of his authority was being peeled away under the heat of genuine gravitas. The watching crowd could taste the difference between his manufactured importance and Denzel's earned wisdom, like the distinction between boxed wine and vintage champagne. "Let me show you something," Denzel said, reaching for the shards of broken crystal that a busboy had been afraid to clear away. He knelt down, a two-time Oscar winner on his knees on the marble floor, and carefully began gathering the pieces. The gesture carried more dignity than all of Morrison's practiced posturing. "Sir, please, you don't have to," Marcus started, but Denzel raised a hand. "No, I want to. Because this, right here, this is the difference." He stood, holding the gathered shards. These pieces? They're just glass. Expensive glass, sure, but still just glass. But that young man's dignity, his dreams, his determination to build a better life, that's something precious, something you can't put a price tag on. He turned to address the room at large, his voice carrying the same power that had commanded theater audiences for decades. I've played men of power, men of influence, and you know what I've learned? True power isn't in making people feel small. It's in recognizing the greatness in others, especially when they're still growing into it. The phones kept recording, but now they were capturing something their owners hadn't expected, a master class in humanity, delivered by someone who knew the difference between playing importance and earning it. Denzel placed the gathered shards on a nearby table, each piece set down with deliberate care. Then he reached into his jacket, withdrew his wallet, and extracted a card. Not with the flourish of someone making a show, but with the simple efficiency of a man who'd known what he was going to do all along. "Marcus," he said, turning to the young server who hadn't moved, hadn't even breathed. "Take my card. My assistant's number is on the back. Call tomorrow. I want to hear about this medical school of yours." He smiled, the same warm expression that had charmed audiences for decades, but this wasn't for the cameras. "I've got a foundation that helps promising students. Something tells me you'd be a perfect fit." Morrison began to sputter, his world tilting off its axis. "Mr. Washington, surely you can't be rewarding this kind of—" "Actually," Denzel turned back to him, voice quiet but carrying enough steel to build a bridge, "what I can't do is stand by while someone confuses wealth with worth. So here's what's going to happen." He pulled out his checkbook. "I'm covering the bottle, the entire night's tab, and a generous tip for every server on staff." His pen moved with purpose. "And Marcus here? He's not going anywhere. Unless ... He looked at Marcus directly. "Unless you'd prefer to leave this job, in which case I know several excellent establishments that would value both your work ethic and your dreams. The choice is yours, but it'll be your choice, not his." The silence in the Cardinal Club was absolute. Even the phones had lowered, their owners suddenly conscious of witnessing something too authentic for social media's usual hunger. The next few minutes in the Cardinal Club unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, but one where the usual performers had forgotten their steps. Morrison retreated to his office without another word. His authority evaporated like champagne on marble. The phones finally lowered, their owners suddenly self-conscious about their earlier eagerness to record someone else's humiliation. Marcus stood straighter now, Denzel's card in his hand, feeling simultaneously lighter than air and heavier than all his medical textbooks combined. Around him, other servers moved with renewed confidence, their spines a little straighter, their steps more assured. The whispers had changed tone, no longer cruel entertainment, but something closer to awe, tinged with the uncomfortable self-awareness that comes from watching your own reflection in an unexpected mirror. The hedge fund manager who'd snapped his fingers earlier now stirred his drink quietly, avoiding eye contact. The debutante who'd left the penny tip had slipped away to the ladies' room, her face flushed with something that looked remarkably like shame. By midnight, the videos had already gone viral. Not the humiliation Morrison had intended, but something far more powerful. Clips of Denzel Washington kneeling to pick up broken glass, speaking about true class, defending a young man's dignity. They spread across social media like wildfire. The headlines wrote themselves. Denzel Washington shows true class at elite club. Oscar winner teaches real-life lesson about dignity. The Cardinal Club's phone lines were flooded the next morning, not with complaints about a dropped bottle, but with inquiries about Marcus's medical school fund. Other celebrities and influential members began making donations. The story had struck a chord that resonated beyond the marble walls and crystal glasses. A week later, Morrison quietly resigned to pursue other opportunities. The new manager, a woman who'd worked her way up from serving tables, implemented immediate changes. The penny-tipping debutante's father, embarrassed by his daughter's viral infamy, made a substantial donation to a scholarship fund for service industry workers pursuing higher education. 3 months later, Marcus still worked at the Cardinal Club, but only on weekends. His medical school scholarship, launched by Denzel's foundation and amplified by the viral story, covered not just his tuition, but his sister's medical expenses as well. His mother had been able to quit her second job. He kept the broken champagne flute's bass in a small box on his desk, next to his anatomy textbooks. Not as a reminder of humiliation, but of the night true class had revealed itself. Sometimes, during particularly challenging study sessions, he'd look at it and remember Denzel's words about recognizing greatness while it was still growing. The club had changed, too. The marble floors and crystal glasses remained, but there was a different atmosphere now, one where dignity wasn't measured by the price of a bottle or the weight of a wallet. On his graduation day years later, when Dr. Marcus Thompson returned as a guest, Denzel Washington was there again, not for the cameras or attention, but because that's what class does. It shows up, it lifts up, it pays forward.